Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Monster Party, the Japanese prototype brought to us by Bandai. Many, including myself, know and love the original Monster Party, and there have been rumors about differences in another version of the game, but we never got to see it. Recently, the Japanese prototype of the game was finally discovered, and it was never actually fully released in Japan, so the prototype is the only thing we have of the game. The difference in the game, while the whole gameplay is pretty much at its core the same, there are differences and we'll be going through them as we play through the game. The biggest difference being the game is known as Parody World. Basically, instead of just fighting monsters, a lot of what you're fighting are actually parodies of famous Hollywood movies. And because of this, there's no real surprise that a lot of the changes were made from this Japanese prototype over to when they brought it to North America. After, of course, the title screen, we'll jump into the game for our opening story, which does remain largely unchanged. Of course, it's untranslated here, but the story from the US version is pretty much identical. After the lengthy intro, we jump into the first level of the game. In the game, you're playing as Mark, and you have a baseball bat at your disposal to attack enemies with. You have to defeat a certain amount of bosses in their boss rooms during the course of gameplay in order to get keys in order to go through the exit at the end of a level. First up is the giant plant boss, which remains in the US version, however it doesn't have a karaoke machine microphone and the karaoke machine behind it. It also spits out bubbles in the US version, and in the Japanese version it shoots out notes. The plant, of course, is more than likely a parody of the giant plant from Little Shop of Horrors. Mark has some pretty good movement, though in the Japanese prototype it seems to move a little bit slower when it comes to the crawling animation that you can do by ducking all the way down to the ground, which actually can come really in handy when it comes to avoiding enemies. Stopping by the second boss chamber, we run into our good old friend, the dead spider, who is just chilling, and after a few seconds the fly around him will disappear, and we completed that boss as well. When you make it over to this point, you'll see that the game kind of changes completely. One of the coolest moments in the original Monster Party release. However, one major difference from the Japanese and US versions of the game is the music doesn't change here in the prototype. They ended up adding another song so that when this change took place and everything went really horrific, there was actually a change in song. Now, this is the biggest difference in the first level. Instead of fighting the Pumpkinhead boss, which is arguably the hardest boss in the first level and one of the hardest in the game in my opinion, we have a Planet of the Apes boss, Yep, an ape riding a horse, firing bullets or knives at us that we have to defeat. I find this fight really challenging in the US version and even harder in the Japanese version, as the hit detection of actually landing a hit seems to be even tougher. This could of course just be me, but I try to be very cautious of staying away from the boss instead of normally what I like to do, run up right behind it and hit it multiple times with each of my close jumps. After he's defeated, we get the key for the first level and we continue on our way. One of the coolest things about Monster Party is not only the ability to use the baseball bat, but it's that whole factor of being able to knock objects back at enemies and bosses, sometimes instantly being able to defeat an enemy if you're able to knock their projectile back at them. Now, once you have a key in a level, all your goal is then is to get to the end of the stage. You don't have to enter any more of the rooms. You do have to defeat all the bosses in a particular level to even get the key, so with that in mind, all the rest of the rooms that I don't end up entering are just empty rooms. After completing a level, you'll get a password, which of course is in all Japanese characters in the prototype, and then we'll move on to level number 2, the sewer level. Start off by heading to the right, take out the first few enemies, and then climb up the ladder here to go to the top, deal with another fish guy up here, and enter the door for the first boss room of level 2, the Medusa Boss. Now you'll immediately notice that she is more human-like in this version of Monster Party. There's a few different ways, of course, to defeat her. You can get up really close to her, you can stand away from her and knock the snakes back up into her, which takes some really good timing, or what I usually like to do is stay relatively close and just keep jumping up in the air and smashing her over and over again with the bat. A lot of the strategies when it comes to bosses in Monster Party is getting in close and hitting them as many times as you can before they're able to drain all your health. Sometimes it just comes down to luck that you're able to defeat them before they're able to defeat you. Now, in the US release of Monster Party, there's a warp that you can take on that lower level right near where we first came in that I usually would use in a speedrun of the game. However, we're going to be skipping that, and I don't actually know if you can even use the warps in the Japanese version. We're instead going to go this way, where we get our first pill in the game. When you get a pill in Monster Party, you become Bert, the gargoyle-like creature that we met at the beginning of the game that fused with us, and we can use Bert's ability to do a projectile, which does a lot of damage to enemies and can be fired rather quickly. While you have Bert's form, the goal is to try to get through as many creatures and make as much progress as you can before it ends up running out. If you're able to pick up another pill so you can continue being Bert while traveling through a level, of course that's the most ideal that you can do. Being as just regular Mark, while you can still manage almost every challenge that the game is going to have to offer, it is a bit more challenging. You'll notice that there are alien-like pods throughout the sewer that actually shoot out the giant facehugger-like creatures. In the US release, they just shot out bubbles that you ended up knocking back into them in order to defeat them, so that's another one of the parody differences when it comes to this version of the game. Travel along the top here and then drop down, taking out the enemies with your bat or using Bert, depending upon if you were able to get another pill or not, and then enter the next door in order to fight the fried food boss. In the US release, we actually fight multiple fried food items, but unfortunately in the Japanese prototype, you only get to fight the fried shrimp. You don't get to fight the onion rings or the shish kebab. But the battle is still the same. He may have a little bit more health because it's only one boss this time, but I'm not even sure about that. Usually I actually go into that boss using just the baseball bat, so I got really good at getting up close to behind the shrimp and doing my jumping bat attack in order to take him out. After completing the fried food boss, continue along the top two here, use the alien facehuggers to knock back into the egg-like creatures. This is the easiest way to deal with these guys. Trying to get up really close and use your bat on them instead usually just ends up getting you hurt because they'll fire out one of the facehuggers and end up hitting you. You can ignore the door that was just above us and continue along to the right, take out the enemies here, knock back any projectiles you can at the alligators. This will normally end up netting you another one of the pills to become Bert again. Continue along the bottom until you make it to this ladder here and then climb on up. Use your bat or whatever you have in order to take out the alligator and then enter the door at the far left here. This boss is the Wishing Well boss, and I don't think a whole lot changes with this boss from the US version to the Japanese version. It's a little bit challenging, of course, because you're trying to avoid all the coins that it's firing out. Doing little tiny jumps and hovers with Bert will allow you to keep hitting the well while continuing to fire. Of course, if you have your baseball bat, you'll be knocking those coins back into the well to try to do some extra damage to it. But either way, you're going to stay relatively close to the boss while fighting it. As you notice, once we defeated the boss, we got the key for level number 2, and thankfully we have only a little bit farther to travel before we make it to the exit and move on to the next level. Climb up and down a couple of ladders, and then you'll have to deal with another one of the eggs, which usually ends up giving me some health, which is usually pretty much needed by this point. Health drops are usually consistent from certain enemies, so you'll be able to usually count on certain enemies when you kill them to give you that little bit of extra health, which is great when you're planning and playing the game over and over again. Level number 3 is the cave level. You'll notice if you're a fan of the US version that the background doesn't flash like it does in the US version. Usually that like bluish purplish color will actually be pulsating on and off in the background. Also changed up is the Dracula enemies, usually more bat-like, but now they're just a straight-up parody of Dracula himself, and there's quite a large amount of the vampires throughout the course of this level. Try to get Bert's ability pretty early on and use that to help you, because these enemies are pretty dangerous. They take a lot of hits even with the baseball bat or Bert's ability. You'll then have to fight the Cow Boss, the giant Minotaur boss. Just fire out your projectiles as quick as you can to try to take him out. He doesn't really have a straight pattern. He's very sporadic with his movements. If you have Bert, you'll have a better chance of being able to dodge all around them or be able to use the bat to knock the cows from a distance back at him. But he can be rather challenging early on in this level, but thankfully right outside the level, defeat a couple of the enemies here and you should be able to get another pill or possibly some health. The next little segment has you dealing with a few of these spikes falling from the ceiling, so be careful of them. You can clearly see which ones are going to fall, so just bait them into falling before trying to barrel your way through, especially if you're at relatively low health. In here you're going to battle the Mummy Boss, which you'll notice is actually a solid actual color here, instead of being invisible in the US release, being a little bit tougher to see, but other than that, the pattern remains the same. You're going to use your bat or Bert's ability to just keep firing at him and watching out for his very sporadic movements and ribbon throwing that he's doing. If you get the bat out, though, this is a lot easier because if you're far away from the mummy, you'll be able to knock back the ribbons that he shoots straight out, the bandages, right back at him in order to keep hitting him. If you're really lucky, he'll stay on that far right side a lot of the times, and you'll be able to just keep hitting things back. The timing on the bat does take some getting used to. You'll notice that if you time it wrong, you'll end up just knocking the item up into the air. Basically, the difference between hitting a home run and hitting a foul ball in baseball. Timing is everything. Continue along here, and we're going to take the bottom route as it's a little bit easier because we don't have to deal with the two Draculas on the top portion. And then go through this little small opening. When you get over here, you're going to find the umbrellas, and take out the one before trying to jump up to the top portion, and then take out the next one. If you can actually pull each umbrella one at a time, so that way they don't gang up on you during the course of this area. Thankfully, the door to the left we can ignore once again, and we can get Bert's ability by defeating this vampire. Enter the next door we come to fight, well, in the US version's a spider, but in this version it's actually a parody of the creature from John Carpenter's The Thing. I mean, it clearly looks like the monster from The Thing. So not a surprise that this was also changed from the US release of the game. He moves rather quickly and fires giant X's at you, but he is a relatively easy boss compared to some of the other ones we dealt with in level 3 up to this point. And after defeating him, he was our final boss for level 3, and the exit is just a few steps away. Moving on to round number 4 is kind of like an inside of a pyramid, as you can see from like the hieroglyphics and stuff in the background. You'll have scorpions to deal with, and giant snakes as well. Snakes are a little bit harder to hit because they don't fire any projectiles that you can knock back, but the scorpions, as well as the alligators that we've been dealing with, are very easy to deal with because you can get up close or you can knock a projectile right back at them in order to defeat them. If you're lucky, sometimes a creature will drop a question mark, and the question mark can actually be a few things. It could be points, but it could also be health or an burst ability, so always a good idea to pick up the question marks. Avoid the snake or take that out with the scorpion and move up here in order to fight the samurai boss. I don't think there's really much difference with this boss in the US release. He moves really slowly, and your goal is going to be to knock back the swords at him every time he throws them out. Now, you can get close to him and try to hit him that way, but the easiest way to deal with him is just staying far away from him and just trying to knock the swords back at him. Since he moves so slowly and doesn't fire that many projectiles, he's a pretty easy boss. Once you're back in the main level, head over to the right, take out the scorpion using one of its projectiles. It usually drops a heart, so you can replenish some of that health that you may have lost in the previous fight. And then you want to take down the bottom path here. Don't go up to the top path. You need to walk along the bottom here all the way over to the right to find another door for another boss. This is the Gremlins Boss. As you'll notice, it's all cute and cuddly here, and in the US version, this is actually a cat that goes into the box and then comes out all fierce. But in the Japanese version, it's actually supposed to be a mogwai from the movie Gremlins, starting off as like Gizmo and then turning all evil after it goes inside the box, and even fires out little gremlins directly at you. Once again, no surprise that this was changed over for the US version for copyright reasons, and it makes a little bit more sense now to me than the cat did. I was never quite sure why the cat all of a sudden just went pure evil once it went inside the box, but now it makes more sense. Once you've defeated that boss, head back over to the left, deal with that scorpion that we dealt with a couple of times already. Thankfully, it will drop health again. Now, I think it will only drop health a couple of spawns. Once you've defeated it like 3 or 4 times, it won't drop health anymore, but I'm not positive on that. A few steps later, we should be able to defeat an enemy and grab a hold of Bert's ability. With Bert's ability, just barrel through the next set of enemies until you're in another big open area. You can kind of fly over, duck underneath where you need to with the scorpion in order to hit him. Ignore the next door that we come to, and then use, if you have it, Bert's ability to fly up here in order to enter this door to get to the rock and roll boss. This boss remains the same in the US version, as it just moves back and forth, takes up a large amount of space, and fires out musical notes really quickly. If you have Bert's ability, this will help you out as you can fire those straight out projectiles directly at him and hopefully defeat him before its ability ends up running out. But if you have to use the bat, it can be a pretty tricky fight, and it's also the final one for the level. Continue all the way along the top portion here, and you'll have to make jumps here, especially if you don't have Bert's ability, so be very careful. Take out the scorpion before attempting to jump over these smaller platforms here. Over in the next section, use your bat to take out the scorpion using its own projectile, and then deal with the next gator. Here, you can just walk underneath the projectiles, though if you're lucky, you can actually time it so you can hit one of those kind of like foul ball-like projectiles back up at the scorpion, but it's best just to ignore him and walk underneath and then go over to the right in order to make it to level number 5. Level number 5 is the most straightforward level in the entire game. It's just a straight line. There's really not even any upper paths to take or multiple leveled platforms, so it's pretty much just walking straight and making a lot of jumps to avoid enemies or make it over the water, which if you do fall down into, it will hurt you, so you have to always be cautious of that. And there's a few Bert abilities throughout in order to help you. Now here is one of the most interesting rooms, of course, in all of Monster Party. In the US version, there's only 2 zombies, and you're actually able to hit the zombies, and they'll fall apart, then reform, and start dancing. Your goal is actually just to watch them dance. They will dance for a certain period of time, and eventually then you'll be able to leave, as they'll be defeated. However, in the North American version, since you could actually hit them, and actually turn them into, like, just a mush on the ground, when they would reform, the dance would start over again from the beginning. So if you kept hitting them over and over again, you would just have to keep watching them dance, and you never would be able to leave the room. So it's interesting how they changed that up. Also, the color of the lanterns at the top of that screen were also changed up. Now, just a few steps over to the right, there's another boss. This is the giant Javelin throwing boss. And the difference here is he actually has 2 faces. As you saw when we first went into the room, he had one face showing, and then he actually turned it so that the other one was showing, and that's the one that we're battling. You can jump on top of this rock and just keep knocking the projectiles back at him in order to defeat him. After he's defeated, that's the only other boss in this stage. Pretty easy level overall, not just from its straightforward path, but also the fact that 2 bosses are only in the level, and one of which you don't even have to fight. Heading over to the right, we're going to watch out for the fish with the giant shark fins on their back, one of the classic enemies, as well as you have the giant monster with its giant neck popping out of the water, and a pile of fish bones that just hop straight up in the air and then back down. Those giant fish bones are actually the only enemy I fight most of the time, because they just jump straight up and gives you enough opportunity to hit them before they drop back down. You can destroy them, and this is how I'll end up getting my bird ability or any of my other things throughout the course of this level. Eventually you'll come to a green door, and you can enter that at the end in order to move on to level number 6. And oh boy, do you want to talk about differences from the easiest level to one of the most obnoxious levels. Level number 6 is a giant maze. The whole time you're being bombarded from above with falling fire or ghost-like spirits. Follow the path that I take through the many different doors in order to make it to the boss chambers, while also eventually making it to the end of the level itself. In this room right here, avoid the pair of pants that's just walking back and forth, and enter the door right to the right of him. Destroy the giant chair in the hallway. This way you'll be able to get the Burt ability. Then go back to the previous door and go to the far right. You'll now be at the bottom below that door. But having the Burt ability is definitely a big help. Enter the door right after that, and then run across here watching out for more of the spirits, and enter the door for the actual boss fight here. The boss here is like a chameleon-like boss that blends in with its background. In the US version, there's a bunch of heads moving all around just like him, so it's a lot harder to see him. When you do damage to him, he flashes so you know you're hitting the real one, but for this Japanese prototype, it's obviously really easy to see him and easy to hit him. Once he's defeated, he's the only boss for the level, so you'll get the key for destroying him, and then you just have to make your way through the rest of the level, entering the doors I do, until eventually reaching that exit. It is a very tricky path at times to try to figure out those right doors, and doing it on your own the very first time will probably take you a while, but eventually you'll come to the blue-framed door and be able to move on to Round 7. Now, Round 7 is a lot of changes during the course of this stage. Not only are some of the floors as you're walking up and going up a whole series of ladders, one by one making your way up, that some of the designs of these rooms does change up from the US to the Japanese release. Also, there's another boss in the US version that's not included in the Japanese version. Here, what you have to do for the first boss is Royce, this giant bug that moves back and forth by rolling. Get it? Rolls Royce. And all you have to do is pretty much just hit him with the bat every time he rolls towards you. If you time your hit correctly, he'll just roll on through you once you do hit him, and that brief period of invincibility will allow you to hit him without him hurting you. Once he goes down, we'll be able to continue in the level. The big difference, though, from the US to Japanese versions of level 7 is there's another boss in the US version. In the Japanese prototype, there was another boss supposed to be in this level. It was the Totem-Pole Boss, basically a series of totems stacked on top of one another that you would have to battle. However, that boss was cut from the Japanese version. However, the sprite and coding for the boss still exist in the game, so you can actually get it with hacking the ROM itself. However, they also added another boss to the US version to replace that Totem Boss and included it in the main game, the Spider Boss, basically a repeat of that Spider Boss that we would have fought earlier on that ended up getting changed into the Thing. Here we have a giant boss that is clearly based on the xenomorphs from the movie Alien or the Alien series, instead of actually battling a giant Grim Reaper like you do in the US release. Now you'll notice you'll get a key. In the US version, you also get a key for defeating only 2 bosses. However, because they did not change the programming of the game to include the 3rd boss that they ended up adding, once you destroy the 3rd boss in the US version, the Spider Boss, you end up losing the key, and you can't get it back. It's one of the weirdest glitches, and it's a programming error. I always thought it was kind of a trick they were trying to pull on you, since it is a horror-themed game, and a lot of old NES games love to trick you, but it's actually a programming error that causes it. In the Japanese version, there's no 3rd boss, so you don't have to accidentally worry about fighting another boss and losing the key during the course of level number 7. The rest of the level, though, is just going to have you heading upwards. Another change is you'll notice that there's a creature during some of the floors that looks like Jason from Friday the 13th, the Jason mask on him. And in the US release, that was changed over to a kendo mask. Once you do finally reach the top, though, you have completed level 7, we move on to the final stage of the game, which doesn't really have too much different about it compared to especially the previous level that we just got done with. The big key here is you have these weird creatures that fly at you. They're like exploding ghost dynamite or something like that. But either way, they are a good source for grabbing extra health and extra burp pills throughout the course of the stage, and they're very much needed. The creature we battle here is the same as he is in the US version, and he's tough, so hopefully you'll have Bert's ability and you can just keep firing, get really close to him, and mash the attack button. Since you have the Bert ability that does the double wave-like attack during the course of this level, it does a lot of damage to him really fast, and you can easily destroy him. Continuing over to the right, make sure, like I said, to destroy some of these dynamite-like creatures so that you can end up getting some extra health. You'll need a good amount of health, probably, in order to battle the final boss of the game. Here, you can also destroy another dynamite guy to get another Burt pill. Here, you're going to have to fight the Pharaoh Boss, and this guy looks pretty gruesome, I have to say. Now, this boss is actually tougher in the Japanese version because he floats. You may have noticed that he was actually a little bit off the ground. In the US version of the game, he's directly on the ground, so he's easier to hit, especially if you're just in your normal human form and using the baseball bat. It's really tough to beat him in the Japanese version by only having the bat because you have to jump up constantly to actually do damage to him. You're probably going to run out of Burt ability right about here or so, give or take, depending on how quickly you're able to defeat the previous 2 bosses. But don't worry, you'll be able to get it again hopefully soon, by just moving a little bit forward and fighting another one of the dynamite creatures. Now, they actually do explode once they even get close to you, so get the Burt ability, then backtrack to this building here for the next boss, the Snake Boss. Nothing really changes up with this boss in the US to Japanese versions of the game, however he starts in a different position in the Japanese prototype. And that's really it. He's a very simple boss, especially if you have the Gargoyle Burt ability. Doing that battle with the bat only is a lot tougher. Now, it's just time to go to the end of the stage and fight the final boss of Monster Party. Try to have Burt ability, of course, before entering this door here, so you have the most amount of time with it in order to actually fight the boss. For this giant face, what a creature this truly is, you'll have to float up into the air and use Burt's ability to hit the nose that it has on its front while it fires out projectiles at you. Hopefully you have a little bit of health going in because it's a pretty easy boss fight as long as you have the Burt ability and a little bit of health. The biggest differences with that boss is his nose is always open, and you can keep hitting him over and over again. In the US version, it actually opens and closes. Also, you'll notice that he actually stays on screen after you kill him, like he's just a big flash version of his face. Stays on screen while the music plays at the end. However, in the US version, he actually disappears and it's just a black screen, plays the victory music, and then the ending plays out. So now you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Monster Party, the Japanese prototype. So there you have the Japanese version of Monster Party known as Parody World. As you can see though, there's a lot of differences, and whether you prefer the US release, of course, just mainly nostalgia, or you prefer more typical monster fare or horror fare compared to the parodies that we see in this version, that's of course going to be purely up to you in the end. I'm a huge fan of Monster Party, one of my favorite NES games ever, and this is one of those rare examples that you have a US game released, but it was never released in Japan, but we have a prototype for it. There was a lot of Japanese games that kind of got brought over or were gonna be brought over, and we've seen prototypes for them, but the game never got fully released, and this is one of those rare chances where we have the opposite going on, so at the least, it's a curiosity for sure. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a thumbs up or commenting down below. Those things actually do help the video get seen by more people. Now if you enjoyed this playthrough, why not jump back into the Wayback Machine and go all the way back like 8 years ago and check out one of my earliest playthroughs of all time, my Monster Party Play It Through. Now, I also want to give a huge special thank you to all the members of my Patreon who you are seeing listed. Their monthly pledges are keeping this channel alive and keeping new content coming. And you can join them by clicking the button right down below, that Patreon button. As little as a pledge of $1 a month can keep this channel going. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.